Hello, my name is Mike Pesoli, and today we are talking with leaders and advocates from LGBTQ plus communities and organizations from different parts of the country about issues that are facing voters heading into the midterm elections. And I'd like to start just by quickly asking you to introduce yourselves, tell us where you're located, and maybe a little bit about what you do. And Charles, I'll start with you if that's all right.
Sure. Thanks very much for having me on. My name is Charles Moran, and I'm the president of Log Cabin Republicans. Log Cabin is the nation's oldest and largest organization of LGBTQ Republicans and our straight conservative allies. Our organization has been around for about 45 years. We were created at the behest of then Governor Ronald Reagan in California. We have chapters in 80 chapters in over 40 states and an headquarters here in Washington, D.C., which is where I'm located. Home is Los Angeles. And I have been a professional in the political and nonprofit fundraising world for the bulk of my career and have been leading Log Cabin for the better part of the last 3 years professionally for the national organization.
My name is Rolando Chang-Barrero. I am District 7 representative of the state LGBT Democratic Caucus here in Florida. I'm also an artist and a curator. I got my own gallery and been involved in politics since the 80s.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jaron Totten. I currently reside in Detroit, Michigan. I serve as a social outreach coordinator and legislative advocacy specialist at LGBT Detroit. We are North America's largest African-American found and led LGBT nonprofit. We sit on the northwest side of Detroit. Here I lead 5 programs. Our biggest and largest is Hotter Than July, which is Detroit Black Pride. We're the longest running Black Pride in the world, celebrating 27 years this year. I also lead a winter pride event called Cold as Hell. I lead a voter engagement, voter outreach program called Pride Decides. And then 2 HIV intervention and prevention programs, one called D-UP that we do in partnership with Community Health Awareness Group in downtown Detroit. Another one called Brother to Brother, which takes the form of a video podcast that airs every other Thursday. Some of my civic duties include I serve as the precinct delegate for the 201st precinct in Detroit. I also have been appointed to Governor Gretchen Whitmer's LGBT leadership task force. And currently I serve as vice chair of the Grassroots Caucus for Michigan's Democratic Party.
We are also the state's oldest LGBTQ advocacy organization. As a 501c3, we are nonpartisan and we do not endorse candidates, but we do voter education, voter registration, a lot of get out the vote work, and connecting candidates with our community so that they can share their position, and so that our community knows how to reach out to candidates and elected officials in our state.
Great, thank you so much. So let's just jump into it. We're halfway into the Biden administration, and a lot has changed since President Joe Biden has taken office. And the first thing I kind of want to know generally from you all is, what are some of the issues that are driving you to the polls this November? And what's at stake for you? And again, I'll kind of move in the roundtable way. So again, if I could start there with you, Charles, to answer that would be great.
2022 presents a host of issues challenging this entire country, and for LGBT voters, those are very similar to what drives mainstream voters. We've got pocketbook issues that are really affecting Americans up and down the board, and regardless of where you fall on the spectrum with our sexual identities and gender orientations, it's something that's hitting everyone. So that's really what we're doing to, drive voters, to educate them, and to also, on my side of the world, dealing with Republicans, let them know that there are far more things that bring us together in terms of what, unites us versus the things that divide us, and continuing to remind common sense conservatives that an inclusive message, one that it brings in all voters regardless of your walk of life, is something that's going to be supportive. So that's our driving point moving into the 2022 midterms.
Rolando, what is driving you to the polls issue-wise this November?
We're uniquely positioned here in Florida because we have both a very strong governor that's got his eyes set on the presidency, and our gubernatorial elections now with midterms is critical. So depending on those outcomes, depends on how much LGBT rights in medical needs and everything is going to be affected, because he's leveraging the governorship as a platform for his presidential campaign, and that's of concern to a lot of people as well as for myself.
Sure. And Jaron, how about for you? What's bringing you out to the polls in this November midterm election?
Well, it's, in the state of Michigan, we definitely have a couple of key issues on the ballot for the midterm elections. One being reproductive freedom. It is on the ballot. And let me just talk about a little bit about the work that we've done around that issue. We've been working on this issue for about a year. We've known that there's been a threat to this issue for quite some time. And we began this work summer of 2021 and began to brainstorm how we could protect reproductive rights in the state of Michigan. We sit in coalition with about 60 organizations statewide through a table called Michigan Voices. And with Michigan Voices, we spent this summer collecting signatures that would put the issue of reproductive freedom on the ballot. We needed 425,000 signatures to get that issue on the ballot. We got 700,000. That is a testament to the support that the voters in Michigan gives to this particular issue. So the issue is now on the ballot. That's one of the things that are driving me and the voters that we talk to the polls. The second issue that is on the ballot in Michigan this year is the issue of voting rights. We are facing having voting more accessible to voters in the state of Michigan is a great opportunity that we have to get this done. And so the voters that we talk to are very concerned with those two issues, reproductive freedom and voting rights.
Great. And Jamie, how about you?
So there are a number of motivating issues to get us out to the polls this year. Here in Georgia, we have important elections all the way up and down the ballot, from the governorship to the Senate to statewide elections and local municipal elections, which are the places where a lot of decisions about our day-to-day lives are actually made. So we have a lot of important things here. But as far as the issues that are really driving participation, it's everything connected to freedom, equity, and justice. Reproductive rights are incredibly important for LGBTQ folks because they hit at the core of bodily autonomy, and we believe in bodily autonomy for all people. As a parent, I am particularly concerned about the attacks on LGBTQ young people, particularly trans young people, and their participation in basic activities of daily life, going to the bathroom, participating in school, and that's incredibly important to us. Education, mental health care, expansion of Medicaid here in Georgia so that we can have full access to health care for all of our people. Those are really important things, as well as the basic day-to-day things that we need, social safety nets. We've seen that we need better health care with COVID and monkeypox pandemics. We've seen that LGBTQ folks have been more negatively impacted than our straight counterparts. And so we're going to vote for all of the reasons that everyone else is going to the ballot, but particularly because we want to make sure that we ensure the rights that we have already gained, whether that's to marriage equality, religious freedom, separation of church and state, bodily autonomy, and we want to keep future attacks on LGBTQ people at bay as well.
Great. So you've all mentioned some really fantastic things, and some of those I'm going to definitely circle back to in a moment. But something I wanted to ask along those lines too, a lot of our AP polling currently is showing that people are making things like personal finances and the economy one of the biggest priorities for them when it comes to this election. Are you seeing that or feeling that with the people you're talking to in your organizations or your communities, that on top of course, LGBTQ plus issues, things like the economy are definitely driving them out there too? And Charles, I'll start again with you. We'll kind of try to keep the same order if that's okay.
Sure. Just for a little bit of context, looking at the 2020 election results, according to New York Times Edison Research exit polling, the LGBT vote went almost a third of the community ended up voting for the GOP in that election. So there's a lot of diversity within the LGBT vote for where they are politically. So there's not necessarily one party or one thought model that governs the way that LGBT voters vote. So using that as a platform, and again, I kind of started out my comments talking about it. There's a lot of people who are just generally rejecting identity politics. Obviously, we rank the different things that impact us very differently. We've seen, even with the Dobbs decision, I mean, it just kind of has scrambled, just some of the general math on what people prioritize in both directions. But in this election, I think we're definitely seeing the inflation problems, energy security, supply chain problems, inflation, just the generic and general cost of living is just weighing higher and higher and higher on people's minds, and it's cutting across race, gender, sexual orientation, political persuasion, religious backgrounds. So it would be very inaccurate to say that, quote, all LGBT voters are voting the same way or have the same value system. It is as diverse as America is diverse.
Rolando, for you, is the economy and what's happening with inflation part of this discussion about coming out to the polls in November?
Yeah, I agree with Charles. People have this tendency to view LGBTQ community as a voting bloc or as a singular minded group of people. And there's so many intersections within our own community, and mostly income stratus is one of the things that affect us most. We have homelessness issues. We have, a whole bunch of things right now. Within the community here in Palm Beach, now we're in a housing crisis, and people are being, going crazy now. How can I best explain this? We're no different than everybody else. That we're facing other issues aside from the criminalization of medical practices, banning books, conversion therapy, and all these that affect our community firsthand. We are dealing with tabletop issues, just like everybody else. Our rents have almost doubled, and the economy is not treating us really nicely these days. So I think that's one of the biggest driving forces to get people out. And the Roe v. Wade issue has trickled down into fear that everything in our community, medical practices, may be criminalized. The Don't Say Gay is criminalizing teachers from speaking. So there's so many different issues that affect not just the LGBT, but our counterparts in the straight community, because they affected them too. They have children.
Sure. We're definitely going to come back to a little bit of that. But Jaron, I wanted to ask you too about, is the economy something and those concerns something you're hearing in discussions with people or for yourself?
So again, the LGBT Detroit is North America's largest African-American found and led LGBT nonprofit. The majority of the people that we serve live in that intersection. This is not a new conversation for those folks, right? And like other issues like HIV, it didn't become a conversation on the national scale until it began to impact straight white men or white men in general. This issue has been an ongoing conversation that did not start just now.
And how about you, Jamie?
As speaking as a woman and as a lesbian, someone who's been in part of the queer community for a long time, we've seen economic disparity within the community forever. Women still make much less on the dollar than men, and particularly women of color, disabled women, single mothers make much less than white men, even in the LGBTQ community. So we've always had economic differences, and certainly that is a motivating force in this election. I think that you'll find people on both sides of that, but from my view, we're not only living with record inflation, but we're also living with record corporate profits. And so we are asking, and we believe that people are motivated by real safety nets, looking for our government to take care of the services and things that we trust our government to take care of. We want to see healthcare. We want to see education. We want to see full access to the ballot. And those are also pocketbook issues, because being able to vote it impacts a lot of different things, and the economic policies and tax policies, certainly trickle down from who is able to vote. So, I think one thing that we all agree on is that our community is incredibly diverse, and that none of us are single issue voters. We just come down on different sides of different issues based on, what our needs are. And, I agree with Charles that identity politics is not ideal, but at the same time, we bring our whole selves and all of the identities we carry into the voting booth. And so, we're not trying to vote, as an identity monolith, but we also can't ignore the fact that LGBTQ plus people have all of the same needs that everyone else does.
Great. The last question I'm going to ask about this before we switch into more focused questions about community issues is, being that we're nearly halfway through the Biden administration now, do you feel that the president and Congress are meeting your needs as voters? How do you think it's going?
Well, obviously, being the leader of the fierce opposition here, I think that the Democratic-led leadership in Congress and what we're seeing in the Biden administration has been a colossal failure for all Americans, including the LGBT community. But beyond that, I don't think, we've seen a lot of tinkering around the edges and being a little more tone neutral about it. Obviously, we've seen some proposed regulatory changes throughout the Health and Human Services, the Department of Education, things that can be done at the ministerial level versus, actual legislation. The Equality Act has not moved. We support an alternative version of that called the Fairness for All Act, which does in our opinion, better job balancing religious freedom issues while protecting LGBT rights. Legislatively, we've really not seen much move. We had the Respect for Marriage Act, which received, I think, a surprising amount of Republican votes, given the way that it was introduced with less than 24 hours notice as an emotional response to the Dobbs decision in Congress. Obviously, we're still waiting for a vote on that in the Senate, which allegedly we should be getting after the election, but having broad bipartisan support on that. And then, like I said, on the administration side, it's just been very much, small ministerial tweaks here and there, redefinitions of words and different rules. So has there been any kind of broad scale movement on LGBT issues on the federal basis? Not necessarily, but I don't know if necessarily any of it's needed. We're living in a time of, the most equality that our communities have ever seen, not just governmentally, but also just socially, with the way that our movement has rapidly advanced in terms of equality across the board. Not to say that there aren't still challenges that exist, but we're still living in the broadest amount of prosperity and equality that this community has ever had. So it's a worthwhile question about, what is the definition of success and how much more is needed coming from the government.
How about you, Rolando?
As in all administrations, there's good and bad that's been happening. Some things could have been done better. We're still dealing with a lot of the talking points that the press creates for us, and the shiny objects that keep us all busy. But a lot of good has come out of the Biden administration so far. And all administrations have successes and failures. And we can't necessarily just get caught up in one or the other conversation about it's all good, it's all bad. We are in changing times, and a lot of things with the Supreme Court being conservative and everything, and changes that are happening that need to be confronted. These elections will mark the directions, at least in Florida, which way we're going to proceed. The whole idea that the House and the Senate is split, and it's just not working because everybody's pushing for talking points and re-elections, and we need to get more done in the country. And I think Biden is handling it well. I think the last presidency, we got a lot done also. So it's tough to say, what the report card is, because how I said, changes are happening, and I'm 60. I came out at 16, and I think in agreement with Charles, we do have a lot of freedoms, and some of them are on the line. Marriage equality may be on the line, healthcare might be on the line. So we have to tread carefully and keep in mind that we're all humans, more so, not just voting blocks.
The voters that we talk to are indeed frustrated, because while there have been some advances, the scale to which those advancements have been made are not what our population has been promised. So we're not too enthusiastic about what has happened since the start of this administration. But we have to look at the why, right? I'm not placing blame on Joe Biden. There are many different factors playing into this. One, we have contrary Democrats in office who more often than not vote with the other side. It's hard to get things done when you don't have the votes to get it done. I think that it is an improvement from the last administration. Those of us who live in intersection, like the people that we serve, had 4 years of trauma, public trauma, almost daily. Some of the biggest being these public lynchings of Black bodies. And so I think it takes an incredible amount of gall and privilege to say in these times that equality has made great strides. And so there is definitely much more room for improvement than I would care to have. But that's where we are. That's where we are.
I think that we've had some advancements. I agree with Jaron that I think we're moving in the right direction, but the magnitude of movement isn't what we'd all like to see. And at the same time, we have generations and generations and generations of discrimination, of homophobia, of racism, sexism to unpack in this country. No administration is going to be able to undo that in 4 years or 8 years. And so, our goal, our work, we know that our work started many administrations ago, and it will continue for many administrations forward. And so the work that we do isn't dependent upon the administration. We do work for the people and to try to motivate people and to push progress forward. I am concerned that some of the gains that we have made in the past few years have been primarily through executive order or other methods that could be easily undone. And so I would like to see a lot of those rights codified in law. I know that we've talked a little bit about how people are concerned that since the right to privacy underlies the right to marriage equality, that we would like to see that codified in law. We'd like to see a lot of the protections for trans youth that the Biden administration has implemented codified into law. Employment protections for LGBTQ folks need to be codified into law versus policy that can be easily undone. But for me, it's really not a question of can this administration fix everything or not? Because I believe the work is too big and too long for any administration. So we'll continue to push this administration, and then we'll push the next one and the next one and the next one, regardless of what party those officials come from.
We've mentioned some things here that I think are important to kind of discuss together. We've mentioned what happened with the Supreme Court and with reproductive rights. And there have been people talking about concerns about, like we just said, the right to privacy, the right to same-sex marriage, things that affect the community, that those rights are kind of at risk. And on top of that, and certain legislation stateside that are being proposed or passed, is there a concern about the rights of LGBTQ people being at risk moving forward? And is that something you feel or are discussing with the people in your communities or organizations? And again, Charles, I'll start with you.
Just so that you all understand my framework, we fundamentally reject the concept of intersectionality. So, for the, intersection of all of these different, historical or other sorts of struggles, we just reject that theory. So that's a context from which it's important to understand my answer. As we've heard about, the Dobbs decision, we have constantly been reaffirming that the fact that the Obergefell decision is not under any kind of threat. Democratic talking points have consistently been pointing to Justice Thomas's sole concurrence in that Supreme Court, and have completely ignored the fact that the majority opinion in that piece specifically said that the Dobbs decision was not, and it was supposed to be taken under any circumstance as a attempt to roll back Obergefell or to be applied towards dissolution of gay marriage or revising that. That's just fact. And as we've talked about, even with the Florida parental rights legislation, the fact that anybody thinks that a teacher is being silenced, that is just an abject lie. So there's a lot of conversations that are being driven by the media and by politicians. And some of it is happening on both sides that are just peddling in falsehoods that are trying to gin up a massive amount of angst and fear and frustration in an attempt to drive people to the polls. Obergefell is not under assault. Teachers are not being limited in terms of what they can say in the classroom. These are just, if you read pieces of legislation, if you read the decisions that are coming out from the courts, this is just not true. But what we do know is the fact that, for partisan gain, there's an enthusiasm gap going on in this country. So as it pertains to LGBT issues, and I'm not speaking towards a broader, reproductive rights conversation, as it pertains to LGBT, rights, it's what we're seeing is an escalation of fear, as we saw in 2016, that is actually not going to result in the drawbacks. And I've spent a considerable amount of time this year continuing to remind LGBT voters, to do their homework, to read the pieces of legislation, to read the laws that are coming out, and to keep things in context, because what I'm seeing is just an excuse for, in this, I'm seeing it on the right as well. There's certain organizations that are getting off on the fact that they think they have a shot of overturning Obergefell as an attempt to raise money. And that's just not going to happen. And the same thing exists on the left with organizations who are ginning up massive amounts of angst to try to raise money. And that's just not something, where I'm seeing an actual threat to the rights of people in our community. And again, I'm just going off very seriously what the pieces of legislation say, what the bills say. And there are some states where it is more serious than others. Every one of these state bills, especially the parental rights one, is different. So what we're seeing, that was passed out of Florida is not the same as Tennessee, is not the same as Alabama, is not the same as Texas. So it's really important that, there are pieces of legislation that are truly dangerous. And those are times when our community needs to band together, where we're going to have a unified pushback and response. But the Chicken Little, the sky is falling, light your hair on fire, for pieces of legislation that are not, people are watching us and they're watching our reactions to things. And it's a very, very fine line, that we have to cross, where we can still, again, we have to work with our straight allies to convince voters to vote for the protection of our community. So by, disingenuously lying to the people in an attempt to raise money is not a long-term winning solution.
Does anyone have any response to that or feelings on the subject as well?
Being that I'm the only one from Florida, where House Bill 1557, HB 2011, and 1587 have been enacted, have been gone and been discussed, and we're currently banning books from school, and teachers are under attack. In our education system, as well as our healthcare system, is at risk. Mental health, everything, and it is dangerous for everybody, because I do support the conversation of intersectionality within our community, because Black, Hispanic people get affected more so than anybody else, as well as women. So to reject any conversation within our community about intersections and healthcare outreaches, our community centers are under attack. They're being limited because of the possible criminalization of something that you may say or do, or some kind of instruction. And it's dangerous. The precedents that we're setting in Florida are being used as a platform for the presidential campaign by Ron DeSantis. And he's basically canvassing the country based on religious and conservative viewpoints. And that is dangerous. If he is elected governor, he's going to use that office now as the biggest platform with the megaphone to run for his presidency. And that's going to hurt not only people in Florida, but in the whole country.
Jaren, I think you want, or either one of you both look ready to go.
I think we're probably all ready to go on this. So what I would say is, the truth is that none of us knows what the risk of having Obergefell and marriage equality overturned is right now. We don't know that. We do know that there's at least one sitting justice who would at least like to examine the underpinnings. We do know that sitting senators and representatives have said that they would vote against marriage equality if it came up for a vote. We do know that if Obergefell falls, the majority of states will already have same-sex marriage bans in place that would immediately go into effect. And we do know that people are afraid. So whether or not it's likely that the court is going to overturn Obergefell, we know that people are living with this fear. We know that having legislation to codify the right to marriage equality, that's federal legislation, would allay those fears and would help put down some of this discussion. So I agree with Charles that it's unethical and just downright mean to fundraise on people's fears on any side. But we do know that there is at least some interest in overturning marriage equality, even though the overwhelming majority of Americans support marriage equality. We do know that some people want to push that decision back to the states, and then you have different rights for people in different states. And so, it's true. We don't know if marriage equality is likely to be overturned in the near future. We do know that there's a movement to try to overturn it or to change it. And we do know that federal legislation to codify marriage equality would allay our fears and give us all protections. And so, that is what we want, and that is what we're looking for, so that we can have that be a settled issue, and we can go back to, working on some of the other issues we face day to day.
Great. How about you, Jaron? Go ahead.
Mike, I wonder if, there's a line between, like you said, fundraising on the fears of people and just preparing, right? I talked about a year ago how we prepared for Roe to be overturned a year ago. I also find it incredible the amount of gaslighting that occurs from the right. I'm looking at a blue sky. They see a blue sky, but they call it red. Justice Thomas said in the ruling, and this is a quote, "In future cases, we should reconsider all of this court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell." That's what he wrote in overturning Roe. And so if that's not a clue to prepare, I don't know what is. When it comes to the issue of reproductive freedom, I think we overlook an entire group of people, particularly trans men. I think that legislators and even the Supreme Court overlooked this group of people who have the ability to reproduce. I believe they do only think about women as they perpetuate this kind of political violence on bodies. This is a group of people who are already at high risk of things like violence, sexual assault. One of my volunteers, in fact, helped us get the most amount of signatures. And I asked him, I said, why are you so dedicated to this? He said, I was raped 3 years ago and I became pregnant. And if it had not been for my ability to get this kind of healthcare, I would be a single father attempting to care for a child that I was not prepared to care for. Though I talk often about those who scream pro-life, because there's a difference between pro-life and pro-birth. You can want as many people to have children as you want, but are we taking care of these babies once they get here? Are we expanding healthcare services? Are we feeding them? Are we clothing them? Are we housing them fairly?
No.
Right. So that's not pro-life. That's just pro-birth. And so I think it's even more cruel to require people to procreate without giving them the tools to create a good quality of life for the child.
All right, thank you. Those were all great answers. I think I've taken our time here today. If you would allow me one quick lightning round thing to kind of send us on our way, and then we'll call it a day. I really appreciate this discussion. It's fantastic talking with you all and learning from you. But one quick thing, really just a quick lightning round, is if you had the ear of elected officials from where you are in this moment, what would be something you would bring to the table that you knew that they could hear you, that you would want to put in their mind, in their way. And I guess, Charles, I'll start with you, although it seems like you're in DC, you've got a better shot at that than anybody, I guess.
I guess the one thing I put in the ear is don't take anybody for granted. Don't take any voter for granted. Don't take any constituency or community for granted. This is a year where every vote has to be earned and motivated and convinced and justified.
You're asking us for a job. Show up with metrics and impact statements before you ask for our vote.
Great. And how about you, Jaron?
I would ask them to be present in the off campaign seasons, not just during campaign seasons. Our voters need to be able to access our elected officials in what's next year, 2023, in 2025, when there is no election. That would be what I would tell them.
Great. And how about you, Jamie?
I would ask them to be, I think I'd have to put my mom hat on here and ask them to think about our kids and our grandkids and, future generations with every decision they make. And, whether it's education, housing, healthcare, to really think about how a decision they make today is going to have an impact for, 100 years or more.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. What's nice about this is sometimes we circle back to the same group in 6 months or a year. So it might be nice if we're all here to get together and kind of come back and see where things have landed and how they've all landed with you individually and in your community. So thank you for taking the time today. I wish you a wonderful rest of your week, and thank you again.
Sounds good.